This episode covers sensitive topics including addiction, drug abuse, trauma, and suicide, which may be triggering for some listeners. Please listen with care and reach out to support if needed. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Your Head in Mind podcast, where we dive deep into all things mental health. I'm your host, Kyle, and today we're tackling an important and often misunderstood topic: addiction and its deep connection to mental health. Joining me is Eric Fischer, a Canadian certified counsellor with extensive experience working in both inpatient and outpatient treatment environments in the US and Canada. Eric is a master practitioner of accelerated resolution therapy and is trained in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, two highly effective therapies used for trauma. He's also a professional consultant for the Thumbs Up Foundation, a non-profit focused on integrating community and treatment for mental health and addiction. In this episode, we'll dive into the definition of addiction, common myths, and how trauma and addiction are deeply intertwined. Eric will share his insights into treatment approaches, particularly ART, and the vital role of self-love and emotional awareness in recovery. We'll also explore the stigma surrounding addiction and the crucial role of compassion and community in overcoming it. By the end of our conversation, you'll gain deeper understanding of addiction's complexities, learn about therapeutic strategies, and hear personal stories of hope and recovery. Eric will also give us a glimpse into his recently published book, The Martial Art of Recovery: Self-Mastery Practices to Subdue Addiction and Achieve Mental Wellness. So let's get started. Good afternoon, Eric. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. I'd just like to ask you an introductory question, which is, can you share a bit about your background and what inspired you to become a counsellor?
Hey, Kyle. Yeah, good afternoon your way. Thanks for the question. Thanks for letting me be here on the podcast here. As far as what brought me to counseling, I've had the question asked many times, and I would say that a big piece of it is just an interest in human behavior, human mind, mental health concerns do run on one side of my family. So there is that personal invested interest there. So I did a bachelor's in psych. Then I decided to do a master's in counseling, and it went from there. So I do appreciate being able to have that witness to the empowerment that people have when it comes to the counseling experience, personal growth, personal development.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. And from reading your bio, you have, I guess, a particular specialism in addiction. So how would you define addiction?
I would define addiction as the inability to consistently abstain from a substance or behavior despite negative consequences. If I was to boil it down to a one-sentence answer, it's a very complex subject, but that's one way I would define addiction.
Yeah, I get you. Thank you for that. So yeah, it's very broad, a very broad thing to talk about, and many different reasons why people become addicted to things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and so would you say are some of the common myths and misunderstandings that people have about addiction?
I would say one of the myths or misunderstandings, Kyle, would be that people desire to get into addiction. It's not like somebody wakes up one morning and decides that they want to be in the throngs of substance dependence or addiction, whatever term that you'd like to use. And so I do think another myth is that it's only people of like a low socioeconomic status that have addiction concerns, people that are maybe in poverty or poor, but addiction shows no partiality. Rich, poor, middle class, upper class, it may be that the substance might be different for what someone uses. Like someone poor may not be able to afford maybe cocaine or a certain amount. So that's another myth. And I think another myth out there is that there is no hope for people in addiction, and there's so many different ways to come to the garden of healing, of recovery.
Okay, yeah, I understand that, and people do just see addiction as a very negative thing. It's only people who have chosen to go that way that have become addicted, and there's a lot of homeless people suffering with addiction issues, for example. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of sympathy or empathy there for these kind of people. It's really, some people think it's really easy just to come out of an addiction episode so easily. And what do you say to people who have those ideas?
Yeah, and that's another good point as far as a myth is, oh, well, just snap out of it, just say no. And yeah, just don't do the substance anymore for those that are either in poverty or not. And I would say to those people that we don't have the ability to choose to crave. That's what really knocks out the choice argument for addiction, that it's all about choosing to use a substance or even a behavior. So I would say to people that we need to look at the evidence. You need to consider the evidence that's there, that this is a neurobiological disorder. It's a condition. It's a disease. It fits the disease model. And because of that, because people can't choose to crave, we can't beat people up, with our words or with our behaviors, our mindsets, our attitudes, because they can't stop something that really they would probably very much like to, but they just don't have the skills or the tools, the strategies.
Yeah, I understand that. I'd say that I have a bit of a addictive personality, and I've been reliant on alcohol and drugs sometimes in my life. It is hard to just stop because that's all you think about when it comes to it, to make you feel better, and can use it as a form of reliance to soothe yourself, for example. So mental health conditions obviously have an extremely close connection with addiction, in my opinion. So would you say, in your line of work, is there any really common mental health conditions which play into
Yes, Kyle, I would say that trauma is one of the main mental health concerns that coincides with addiction, depression, anxiety. I mean, there is relationship concerns, not necessarily like a mental health condition, but there is that part. Also, obsessive compulsive disorder, grief often will come with misuse of substances as well, just because maybe someone's going through a really difficult time and they're trying to use something to cope. So there is quite a few different possibilities, even with someone saying they have a addictive personality. I never hear someone say that they have a diabetic personality. And so it's interesting, that word usage, even for addiction, that, yeah, it's just an interesting term that we could get into if you'd like. But anyway, that's a few of the mental health concerns.
Yeah, I understand. So why do you think these people with these specific mental health conditions are more likely to get into addiction? So, for example, let's say trauma. Why do you think people who have experienced trauma are more likely to have, I guess, an addictive personality?
There's so much shame. There's so much misplaced guilt, or guilt that's justified and effective for them to feel or not to feel. That's a question people have to ask with any feeling: is it justified and is it effective for me to feel this at this time? So I think that there's lots of pain, emotional pain, even physical pain, spiritual pain that can come with trauma. And addictive substances is one way for someone to cope with those very debilitating experiences. Maybe it's a single event or it's a range of events that happens across their life, like with childhood abuse, complex trauma that can happen from childhood.
People can be addicted to substances. They take it, and then the drug in itself is addictive. But how about for things which are not necessarily addictive in nature? People can be addicted to all sorts of different things, even from exercise, etc. So how does this play into it?
Yeah, I think with those different things like exercise or even shopping, those type of behaviors, there's a few criteria to look at to see like whether this is okay. This man, this woman, this person, they like to exercise a lot, or they're getting to that place where there's some consequences. So when I look at addiction, does this impact their life occupationally, socially, physically, spiritually, all those different parts? And so when it comes to, let's just take exercise for an example. Do I have an inability to abstain despite negative consequences, such as shin splints, and I still want to do the treadmill, even though it hurts? Or there's that impulsivity piece, or there's that Maybe there's even a craving that I got to exercise or I'm going to feel guilt and shame that one day. Or my relationships, I'm having a diminished recognition that I have problems in relationships, or I got a dysfunctional emotional response if I don't get to go to the gym that day. So the ABCD I just mentioned is part of what's called the American Society of Addiction Medicine's criteria for addiction. Yeah.
So there is a close link between mental health conditions and addiction. What treatment approaches have you found which are most effective for treating people who have addiction and mental health problems?
Accelerated resolution therapy.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably one of the main treatments that I would like to use with folks, whether it's depression, anxiety, trauma, relationship concerns, even a fear of change when it comes to a big decision, or even with addiction. Now, with addiction, that therapy is a supplement. If we were to talk specifically about addiction, I'd use a biopsychosocial spiritual model. So I do want to be able to hit on how to help someone with diet, sleep, exercise, looking at social aspects, getting involved in groups, getting involved with friends that are healthy, family that are healthy, healthy boundaries, emotionally looking at addictive thinking, and also just working on emotional intelligence, which we could talk a lot about just with that particular topic. And then spirituality, I think, is big for any type of mental health concern or addiction, because I often see with addiction, at least, that when it's waxing with the spirituality, people are doing really well. Like they're kind of in line with their meaning, their purpose, their values, all that. But when it's waning, when spirituality's waning, then people often seem to have a difficult time because they're losing direction.
I get you. So when you talk about spirituality in that sense, do you mean in sense of living towards their own values per se?
Absolutely, Kyle. Yeah. So when that comes to community, when that comes to perseverance, when it comes to, love of the self, love for other people. Yeah. So being able to make sure that there's a alignment with that for them.
Yeah, I understand. I really feel connected to that because I've had substance abuse issues, and it's more of the sense where some people can have a little bit and have a good time. It's when that turns into something more, and I've realized in myself that if I'm feeling good and I'm in a good environment, I can engage in behaviors where I can have fun and it doesn't go too far. But if I'm using those behaviors to change how I feel in the first place, and I'm not living in line with my values, and then I engage in these behaviors, that is when things start to go downhill.
Yeah, the behaviors, they start to override the values, and then
exactly.
we start to have a difficult time.
Yeah. So tell me more about ART therapy. So you said it's accelerated resolution therapy. So how does that work, and what is it?
Yeah, great memory. Yeah, the brain's ticking, eh? So with ART, the therapy changes negative images to positive images in the brain. And so a lot of the listeners and yourself, Kyle, might have heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Say it 3 times real fast.
A mouthful,
yeah. It sure is. And so the lady that created this therapy, she was actually training in EMDR, and then she realized, hey, there's a different way to do this. And she started to devise ART. And now I've been doing ART since, it's been at least 4 years now. And it's just a game changer. Like if you asked me 3 years ago if I'd be working with trauma where I felt like I was okay with doing that, I would have said there's no way. But being trained in EMDR and also ART is just very non-invasive. It only takes one session, like a 90-minute session, to deal with one traumatic memory, and then it's done. Like there is no follow-up. It's past, present, future, all in one session. Past memory, present sensations, and like a future trigger are all taken care of in that one therapy session.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Could you tell me more about so if I came into the clinic, for example, and I was having issues with trauma, let's say something that happened in my childhood, how exactly would that work? Because a lot of people don't even realize the trauma that they've had, for example. So how would you reach the stage in which you can kind of target things in that way?
When it comes to EMDR, and I'll also do it for ART, we'll do some stabilization exercises. Like we'll talk about some emotional regulation techniques before we get into the history, because it's really tough to talk about those type of events, and I don't want to just go in cold with someone. So I will usually try to do some of those. I'll do an intake, and we might talk about the pain points, but only the headlines. Like, I won't get them to go like knee deep into what they've been through. And so there is different ways to do that. There's the float back technique that I'll sometimes use from EMDR, even with ART, just to get those memories to be talked about. And really, it's just kind of going through, what have you felt overwhelming to you? What have you felt has been really powerful, like overwhelming, traumatic for you that you've been through in your life? And so we'll just start to talk about those things. So the intake is usually first, and then I'll talk about the possibility of ART. I will get them information about the therapy. We'll talk about the therapy, what could it be used for, if they're interested in that, and then we'll go ahead later on down the road with and we'll know what we're going to be. We know what we're going to be working on for the next when we use the therapy.
How does it manifest in actual treatment practice? So say if I had a problem with addiction and I wanted you to help me, how would you put in a plan for the ART and like to address trauma, etc.?
For addiction with ART, we would do what's called the typical day. So this is a therapy just like EMDR that uses eye movements, bilateral stimulation. And so a person's not hypnotized. They're just going to different parts in their brain at a deeper level. So when it comes to addiction, it's being able to pinpoint, okay, well, what are the substances that are being used that you want to work on? We go through what's called a typical day script. And so it's a guided visualization piece. There's some rescripting that's happening. It's like cognitive behavioral therapy on steroids. So they're changing those core beliefs in a very quick succession. And sometimes the brain has a difficult time realizing, wow, there's been a lot of changes in a very accelerated period of time. That's one way of looking at it with ART. Of course, when it comes to addiction, I'll be using traditional approaches, relapse prevention protocols, looking at warnings, triggers. Just, it depends really on if someone wants harm reduction or if they want abstinence as well, because I have to look at which way somebody wants to go first. I'm not going to dictate that someone has to be either abstinence focused or harm reduction, but I wanted to be able to not betray them with whatever choice. That's one way with ART that it uses for trauma. It's using a script for what's called the basic script. And I use that for traumatic events, and we go through the script, and that's one session, one and done usually. Unless it's complex trauma, and it takes a few more sessions.
Yeah, so you're reframing like a negative experience into a positive one, or is that kind of how it is? Like you said?
Yeah, without going too much into the whole protocol. So there's a script each time I use ART, and sometimes it can be the same script over and over, and it's called the director's scene. And with the director's scene, we're putting something in front of the actual memory. And I've seen people, when they do the director's scene, they try to go back to the original memory, and it's really hard to go back to what they were having trouble with. Even if it was anxiety for like a typical day, we change things in that typical day for anxiety to give them a leg up with that concern.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. I've never heard of it before. I don't know if it's really, I'm not sure if it's a big thing in the US, but I've not really heard of it anywhere in the UK.
You know what? I don't know how many people will be using the UK. It may not have been brought over, exported yet.
Yeah.
It's only been in Canada since where I'm at since like 2015 or so. So it's only been around like less than 15 years, which is very young for therapy.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, so do you have any success stories that you could share about particular, people who have come to you with a problem with addiction that you could share with our audience?
Sure. Let's see. Sometimes they all just kind of meld together after a certain point, and it's hard just to pick a certain one. But
seen a lot.
I will give one. Yeah. I'll give one example. So I worked with a gentleman in inpatient, and he came back a second time, needed some additional help, and then I started to work with him in inpatient, and then I worked with him further through outpatient work privately, and he's been sober for quite a while now, like over 2 years. And the biggest piece working with this gentleman was him getting out of his own way. And I think being able to know that the addictive thinking piece is probably one of the biggest pieces for people to work on. And when he was able to deal with that, and deal with a lot of the shame and the guilt. I mean, it opened up so many doors for him, and it's just been amazing to even a drop in on one of his sobriety anniversaries on his like an open, like a virtual open AA meeting, and be able to see what everyone else is seeing with him as well has been cool. So for him, it was just continuing to be curious, continuing to connect with himself, and looking at all these activities that he could do that were dopamine inducing rather than the substance.
Yeah, I understand that. That's a big thing with ADHD, isn't it? A lot of dopamine seeking behavior, which a lot of people can get through taking drugs in a way.
Yep, indeed. And so, yeah, when it comes to trauma, I worked with a gentleman with depression with ART, and throughout that whole session, he was actually like changing his core beliefs, like these self-defeating thoughts. And at the end of the session, he was like, "Okay, well, I feel great. Thanks." And it was an EEP client, so I only had really 3 sessions with him,
Okay.
which is crazy.
What is that? Just like a referred through the healthcare system or something like that?
Yeah, an employment assistance program, and
Okay.
so they only give a certain amount of sessions, which is its own pros and cons, more cons.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was so great to see that change for him in a very quick succession.
That's great. That's a very inspiring story that you managed to help people in that way. And so, what kind of strategies would you recommend which would help patients or people struggling with addiction from relapsing?
Working on self-love and self-compassion is going to be paramount when it comes to relapse. I'm either progressing toward a relapse or I'm progressing in my healing and recovery. There's not really a whole of straddling of the fence there. And so I think people have to realize too, they need to get educated on relapse, that relapse is not usually a single event. I mean, sure, I could be in my basement and stumble upon an 8-ball of cocaine and I go, okay, yeah, without, but then there's a lot of things I might bring myself to that situation too. So there's emotional relapse, there's social relapse, there's spiritual relapse, there's behavioral relapse. And so before the chemical relapse of picking up or with that behavior, there's all these different relapses that are happening beforehand. And sometimes they're very subtle and they can be conniving that way. It could be me just starting to isolate. So I think that first and foremost, the self-love piece, but also equally important is knowledge on, okay, I need to know my warning signs for these different types of relapse. With the behavioral relapse, perhaps I start to, yes, disengage from maybe a counselor or coach, therapist, psychologist, whatever. I start to disengage from friends. Maybe I'm starting to beat myself up a lot more than what I have, or I'm doing it like I did when I was in active addiction. So that could be part of the mental relapse. So it's being able to be very cognizant of those pieces and be prepared and not surprised. And what that means is getting really a list of different activities that I can do, whether I'm having a craving or not. So I would say to have someone know that they can acknowledge they have a choice. There is a choice. We've seen addiction often called a disease of choice because after that first drink or line or whatever, sometimes it's hard. Well, oftentimes it's hard to say, no, I'm good. That's enough if there's an addictive element. So I think acknowledging I have a choice, looking at spiritual strategies, and that could be things that are creative, playing guitar, arts and crafts, going out with friends socially, all that stuff. It could be finding alternative passions that I maybe haven't picked up before. It could be decoding feelings and making sure that I am able to feel what I need to feel, sit with that. But feelings are like kids. You can't let them drive and you can't put them in the trunk either. Well, I guess it'd be, what is it in the UK? Bonnet? What is the...
For the way you put the boot of the car.
The boot. Yeah. So I can't put I can't put the feelings in the boot, or I can't let them drive when it comes to feelings. So they're like kids that way.
Yeah.
So I got to sit with them a little bit. So those are a few of the pieces when it comes to relapse prevention is education, working on self-compassion, self-love, because the shame and guilt will bring someone back quicker than most other things. And just looking at all these different strategies, spiritually, socially, emotionally, finding alternative ways to get pleasure, hedonic rehab, as we call it, pleasure rehab, which is big.
Thank you for that. And
Yeah.
do you think that addiction in some cases it is self-medication in some ways to stop people feeling a certain way, or as a form of escapism, plays into more people getting addicted to things?
Yes. For escape, reward, or relief, people will seek out the substance. Yeah, because I don't want to feel this feeling, And no doubt, like I will never say to someone if I'm, walking with them on their journey with recovery, or even with mental health concerns, like, how dare you want to use this substance to feel better? I mean, how dare you want to try this out? It's if it works, it works for someone. Unfortunately, there's consequences with it in the long term and even the short term. So yeah, it is definitely something that people will use, and people sometimes they don't understand how prevalent, especially with opiates, how quick the feelings can change to where, wow, this is amazing. I don't care about anything. I'm just so relaxed. So no doubts the brain will want to use it.
Yeah, 100%. And as you said, don't let the emotions kind of drive or, go in the boot. People are scared of negative emotions in the sense that I shouldn't feel bad. I shouldn't feel this. Feeling bad is normal. It's kind of haptic feedback that could tell you to maybe you need to change something, or it can be normal to feel sad, especially if it's towards a certain event, and that feeling will pass as long as you acknowledge it.
Yep, totally, Kyle. I think that's a big piece also with recovery, is knowing that feelings are neither good nor bad. They're neither right nor wrong. They might be comfortable or uncomfortable, yet I think that's a part to definitely look at, is being able to be okay with not being okay. And I can, it's okay to feel this, and it's not going to kill me. And maybe it's an opportunity to connect with somebody else through these feelings that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think some people, say people who are struggling with addiction, are scared to tell other people about it because they're worried about the stigma, and that obviously will bring more shame, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure that social media has not helped whatsoever with the shame, with the stigma. It's amazing, back in the 80s when AIDS support started to get big, and now we don't see that much stigma with that population because they've had advocacy. And there's been lots of advocacy for people in recovery from addiction, yet, yes, there is still those microaggressions, or there's, the little quips, whether it's in social media or in like film, TV, on the news, just in basic conversations around the water cooler. Did you hear about so and so? Yeah. So yeah, it's unfortunate, and part of the work I do is trying to advocate for those people that this is a disease like anything else, and it's treatable. May not be curable, at least yet, but it's something that can be treated.
Yeah, well, it's good to know. Gives hope for people that people can get better, and it doesn't have to be that way for the rest of their life.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
So, how can friends and family of an individual suffering with addiction and mental health problems, as well as communities, support individuals who are struggling with addiction and mental health problems?
Getting further informed, I think, would be beneficial. I would just give you a story. We were opening up this treatment center in this community, and we had 2 town hall meetings. And one of the things that came out of the town hall meeting was people actually fearful that there's going to be like child sex predators that were part of the treatment program, and they're going to get their kids. And it's just all this fear. So changing fear to knowledge, changing fear to, well, introspection and reflection on, okay, what's really going on here with people that want recovery, or even people in active addiction. So I think with friends and family, there's lots of like bibliotherapy resources out there. I think one book's called An Addict in the Family. There's different people out there that do help other family members with this. There's even here in this area, there's a Families Helping Families 10-week course that's free to people that want to go through it. And I would say learn about boundaries, learn about how maybe I can influence somebody, but maybe not try to control them. Like the 3 C's of a family member. I didn't cause it, can't cure it, I can't control it when it comes to addiction. And so being able to find that support through like Al-Anon would be important. I've been to a few Al-Anon meetings myself, and I really appreciated that experience. I mean, it was told to me once, hey, Eric, you work with people in recovery, you need to go to Al-Anon too. And I was like, okay.
So
So
what
I've
is
been
that,
to a
sorry?
few. Yeah. So it's Alcoholics Anonymous has their own
Yeah.
branch
Mm-hmm.
for family members, and it's called
Oh,
Al-Anon.
okay. Yeah.
So they're definitely in the UK. They're all across the world. I mean, that can be for friends too. I think just for friends and family, they just need to know their limits with somebody and give them space. Attraction rather than promotion kind of goes both ways. So I don't need to promote them to change, but I can be attracted to someone in recovery or active addiction by having proper boundaries. I'm here when you need me, getting proper support from me.
Because I'm sure it can be very frustrating for family members when someone's in an active phase of addiction and, the whole behaviour can change. And you just, I guess, from the family's point of view, like, why are you doing this? But at the end of the day, as you say, it's a disease state and you can't force someone to just change overnight, right? And I think that can become very frustrating and cause like alienation between family members.
It can bring a lot of wedges for sure because of all those charged feelings. Why are they continuing to do this? Why can't they stop? Why don't they get back in the treatment? Why don't they go back to an AA meeting? All these different thoughts. And have I been to a funeral for a family member of someone that got lost to addiction? Yes. And that's unfortunate. Can they continue to get the support they need even if that happens? Yes, they can. It's difficult, but it can be. I remember a lady telling me that lost her son to opiates, I'm going to bury all my negative feelings, all my negative experiences with my son, or just bury them metaphorically, not with him, but just bury them. And I'm going to keep all those pieces that I have from him, all the things I learned, and the love that she had for him. I mean, and she came to the groups. She came to the groups even after her son passed on. And that was just so encouraging to me and everyone else in the group that she would still come to support herself and others, even after losing her son. So
Yeah, and then she can, I guess, share her knowledge and understanding as well, which could help others.
that was the piece. That was the key. That was what came of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And it's great to hear positive stories like that. For example, my uncle has been addicted to weed for, I don't know, my whole life essentially. But he recently had a bit of a health scare, so he completely stopped cold turkey, and it's been what 2 months now, and the amount of money that he saved, and he's going on holidays now, and it really makes me like proud that he's managed to do that, and it's really, I don't know, it does make me a bit emotional because it's like, oh, it's so well done that he's managed to do that for his own health, and also he's getting the positive effects of it now. He's saving so much money that he can go on holiday and enjoy himself.
That's awesome, Kyle. Good for your uncle.
Yeah.
He's got more dough. He's got more dough for being on the go.
Yeah, exactly.
He can
Yeah.
he can enjoy himself without the cannabis. Nice.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, and cannabis, man, it's just a lot of people come for help with that too, and it's of course in Canada it's legal. So I can remember the day when it became legal. It was just a different feeling in the area, and there's actually 4 cannabis stores, at least 4, in the community where I live. It's mind-boggling being from the States, from a conservative area.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah, I
yeah.
get you. Yeah. Well, it's illegal here, but everybody smokes it. So, yeah. So, I'd just like to ask you some more questions about ART and EMDR. How do they benefit addiction and mental health specifically?
I'll take the just take the case study. Like we'll just take anxiety for an example. And so when I'm working with EMDR, we'll take EMDR. What EMDR does is it's very somatic as well. So it works with the body, just like ART. However, there's more of an emphasis on changing negative core beliefs to positive core beliefs in the brain. So let's say I have a lot of anxiety throughout the day. There's a sheet I usually show people. I need you to pinpoint maybe a negative core belief that corresponds to this anxiety, such as I am not safe or I am worthless or whatever it is. And through the therapy, through the different phases of the EMDR, which there's 8 different phases. The first 2 phases, history taking and stabilization skills, those are usually done with early on. And then we go, well, we can revisit the intake, the history if we need to, but usually it's 3 through 7, and then phase 8 is reevaluation of the previous session. So going through desensitizing to that anxiety, to that negative core belief, and then that's phase 4, and phase 5 is installing the positive core belief, such as I am worthy, or something that's self-referential, it's generalizable, and it's definitely something positive. That's the part with EMDR, is being able to use the eye movements to desensitize someone to, if it's a traumatic memory, that memory, along with desensitizing to that negative core belief, and then installing the positive core belief that goes along with that memory. And so when it comes to ART, it's quite a bit different because we don't really focus on those core beliefs like specifically. It goes back to changing the negative images to positive images in the brain, and that is done through some different exercises that are very metaphorical. There's lots of wordplay involved. So I can't really get into a lot of the specifics. We would be talking about it for a while, but it's just being able to, with ART, someone actually uses eye movements. They're watching the memory like they're going through a movie, like they're going through it on like a TV show. They're not verbalizing the memory. It's just the different images in their mind. And then that's rescripted. And then I do a few other different protocols to reinforce what they've made for themselves that's more positive and affirming and protective.
Okay. Yeah, sounds very interesting, and it's something I'd actually be keen to try.
Awesome.
So you said that trauma is a big underpinning thing with addiction. So how does that resonate? Is it just if someone's gone through a traumatic experience, do they have a negative view of themselves, or like how does that lead to someone having addiction problems?
Not everyone that goes through trauma will develop addiction, and not everyone that's been through addiction will develop trauma. However, there is a very strong correlation with those two. There's a man named Gabor Mate, which I don't think a lot of people, he is quite well known, even internationally. He's written quite a few books. He lives and works in Vancouver. He's a psychiatrist of Hungarian Jewish descent. And he said something that always resonated with me, that sometimes it's not what happens to someone with trauma. It's that's somebody else. What he mentioned was trauma is not what happens to someone. It's what happens in their body in relation to what's happened to them. And so it's what happens on a biological, even cellular level when it comes to trauma. Someone else said, and this is the piece I was about to bring up that I misquoted or misrepresented, it's not always what happens to us, but what doesn't happen to us with trauma. Like, I didn't get the proper nourishing care I needed when I was young. Things like that. It's what didn't happen to us. We didn't have that strong attachment bonds that were nourishing. So when it comes to trauma, then the reason that trauma can often coincide with addiction is, there's just so much pain. There's so much feelings of worthlessness. There's so much blame that people put on themselves. And so it's a way to want to escape the pain, the discomfort, the blame that someone's putting, like someone that's been through sexual assaults. Maybe they blame themselves. Even people might feel stimulated because they've been through sexual assault, and then they blame themselves. Well, I felt stimulation, so I'm guilty. What people don't realize is, regardless of whether it happened or not, it's a human biological function that I don't have control over. So I can't blame myself for that particular instance. I will use substances then because of something I'm blaming myself for, and I want to get away from the thoughts of feeling worthless, of feeling that shame, that guilt. I want to get away from even with trauma, because it lives in the body, which if you read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, he talks a lot about this trauma living in the body. Because it does, I want to use a substance so I don't feel that trauma that lives in here, you
Yeah.
know? So that's a few of the pieces with trauma and addiction.
And trauma is a way, in a sense, for the body to protect itself. You have these learned behaviors, right, that are even can be negative to the individual, that the brain thinks will protect you, but they're actually causing negative outcomes. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the brain, yeah, the brain says, oh, yeah, you need to do this, but it's not going to be good in the long run. So the drug starts to equal survival on a neurobiological level in the brain. So in the midbrain, that's where addiction lives. That's where substance misuse lives, not the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is impacted by the midbrain being activated with substance use. So because of that, because I equate a drug to survival, I think, hey, this is what I need. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, Kyle, there's lots of negative side effects that come along
Yeah,
with that.
definitely. So could you tell us more about your role in the Thumbs Up Foundation and how it contributes to integrating community support and treatment?
Yeah, I love the Thumbs Up
Yeah.
Foundation. Yeah, they do so much good work, and I'm definitely blessed and grateful to be a part of their community and their organization. What they're able to do, Kyle, is on a community level, and they want to branch out to other communities, but on a community level, they're able to cut through the red tape and give people the treatment they need on an integrative capacity, multidisciplinary, so the person gets the help that they need. So I'll give you the process. I can do a comprehensive treatment evaluation with somebody. Maybe it's addiction, trauma, depression, whatever it is. And then we have all these different people that I can refer to. One of them's a clinical hypnotist. She's actually from Europe. She's from Sweden or Switzerland. She's got that accent that tells me she's
Yeah.
from that area. So she's one of our referrals. We have, like I mentioned, the Families Helping Families, which is Cool Family Solutions. That group is part of their referrals. We have a person that's family mediation, Fresh Start Mediation. His team's part of the referral. So we have all these different people we can implement, and then people get a certain amount of sessions with me for no charge, usually,
Okay.
which helps too.
So
So we're able,
sorry,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Is it Thumbs Up? Is it a charity or?
It's a nonprofit organization, and we have a lot of government grants and grants from different donations. Like they did a golf tournament, and they had something called Peace in the Park, which had actually Lee Aaron, which is the metal queen of Canada from the '80s. She played, and so it's just about having a good time and getting the community together. So, going back to that stigma piece, what Thumbs Up is trying to do is advocate for destigmatizing mental health and addiction treatment.
So as you say, it's a charity, but it's got all these different multidisciplinary sections that have all different types of care for an individual. Would you say that has really improved like clinical outcomes for a patient?
I think it's the last 8 years, I want to say, they have been able to do over $2.1 million Canadian for treatment for individuals. And we do evaluations quantitatively. One of the evaluative assessments that we do is called the CPROM. People do that on a ongoing basis. And through that, we've been able to see these numbers increase with their quality of life. Yeah. And with treatment outcomes being successful. It's really cool to have that evidence for these people going through the programs that we do. Yeah. So the whole organization was started because Kim and Kim Titus, that are the primary proponents of Thumbs Up, their son unfortunately died by suicide. And in a lot of his pictures, he's got his thumbs up. So the Thumbs Up Foundation.
That's quite poignant, and yeah, it's great. There's these things available because a lot of people, I guess, in this day and age. There's a lot of individualism where people just think you just do your own thing, you don't need help, or you shouldn't really rely on others. But at the end of the day, no one has built anything by themselves, and having community support, such as Thumbs Up, I think is really important to get help for people, because a lot of people struggle, and if you haven't struggled, it's probably because of someone else around you that's helped you, I guess, in a way. We're social animals, and everybody should help everybody, I think.
Yeah, but it's too bad that it's not as much on a community level. But yeah, people need to help people, and it's just awesome to see the work that they've done on a community level with folks.
Yeah, that's great. I hope they continue to expand and help as many people as possible.
Yep. I don't know if I can bring up certain information that's some things that are in the works, but let's just say that they're going to continue to help people on a very massive scale.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look into some kind of similar foundations in the UK that some of our listeners might be able to get involved with. So yeah, I'll drop that in the description. So what advice would you give to our listeners who are struggling with either addiction or mental health issues or trauma, and are reluctant to seek help due to the stigma surrounding it all?
Going back to what you just mentioned yourself, looking at different organizations, different nonprofits that are in the UK or wherever someone's listening from, being able to seek those out, maybe get a consultation, send an email, maybe do that, pick up that 1,000-pound phone and do a phone call when you got that chance. I think the biggest piece is really social connection. Like one person said it best, that the opposite of addiction is connection, or the opposite of recovery is disconnection. So I think that just being able to seek out support, even if it's online, if someone wants a good resource, intherooms.com is a really good resource for virtual meetings. AA, NA, CA, Overeaters Anonymous, lots of different groups there. You can turn off your camera, you can turn off the mic, and you can just listen if you'd like. You don't have to contribute. Again, looking at self-love, looking at resiliency skills, I think is going to be huge for folks. Just learning what that means for you on an holistic level. I think tapping into spirituality for folks is going to be huge. That does not mean religion. Religion can be part of that. However, that could be out in nature more, which has huge effects. Get out in nature, guys, please. If you don't exercise, please do some type of movement. I could give a meta-analysis study of 17 different reasons to exercise as far as benefits, like creating a sense of freedom, reducing anxiety, alleviating depression, reducing aggression. So find out what you enjoy doing with movement, I think is big too.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I could give so many different pieces, but those are a few things percolating right now for me.
Yeah, great.
From me
that's some good tips. So also you've written a book which is called The Martial Art of Recovery. So yeah, what inspired you to write that, and what impact do you think that could have on people?
How I wanted to find a way to really give a practical, dumbed down approach to addiction recovery, and also for mental health concerns. Not dumbed down to where, they're simple and they're not actual steps, but just things that people could understand, chew on, and relate to. And so for 2.5, 3 years, I was working on this book, and it's all about applying martial arts techniques and concepts to addiction recovery and mental health concerns. And that was one of the big pieces of the inspiring me to write the book, is trying to find a practical, innovative application to something I knew a lot about, which would be martial arts, since I have 2 black belts in 2 different styles. And also something I knew a little about with, now over 14 years of experience with addiction recovery and mental health treatment. So I decided to start to look at these different metaphors that could be used between the two and in the book. And so the book does give a lot of actionable steps, 66 techniques for addiction recovery, over 90 different concepts, terms that could be used for addiction recovery, but also I delve into trauma, depression, and anxiety, and different techniques from martial arts that get translated over for treatment.
Okay, cool. Yeah, sounds interesting. I'm definitely gonna have a read of it. I used to do jiu-jitsu myself, so
Oh,
yeah, back
nice.
years ago. But there's a lot of discipline, I guess, involved in martial arts, isn't there? So does that kind of play into it?
Yeah, yeah. Don't get me started. As you know, you've done some jujitsu.
Yeah.
Yeah, self-respect, self-control, discipline, so many different concepts, balance. Yeah.
Cool. So, do you have any like one last piece of advice or inspiration you would like to share with our listeners?
I heard this from somebody before, and yeah, another therapist, and I've always taken it with me. And I remember him saying, "Not everybody has value." I'm sorry, everybody has value. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, good correction, right? So everybody has value, but not everybody adds value to my life. So, you know, some people have more value than others for me. But the person that is always going to have value is you, is yourself. And so never give up on you. Never give up on seeing the potential for you. The therapy that I mentioned, guys, regarding ART, the empowerment comes from that therapy because people are making those changes themselves. I'm waving my arm, I'm going by a script, I'm doing some facilitation, but that person's making those changes and you can make those changes too. It's possible. It's just doing that next best move for you each day.
Yeah, that's great.
And yeah,
Yeah, that's inspiring, very inspiring for people. And one thing I'd just like to add to that as well is that maybe you aren't suffering with a mental health condition or addiction, but I think one thing that's really important to practice is compassion, because other people, you might think, for example, I'm going to use the example of myself, which is, I've recently stopped smoking, but I've been addicted to cigarettes on and off for quite some time. And people are like, oh, how could you smoke? How could you do that to yourself? And yeah, I know it's unhealthy, but I was in the hospital and I came out of having a psychotic episode. And the only thing that kind of helped me to feel grounded was smoking cigarettes. So even though I know it's not good for me, in that case, it was kind of a coping mechanism. And I guess if you look at other people who are suffering with addiction problems with many other substances, you got to think why might they be doing that thing? Not they should not be doing that thing. I think having the compassion and understanding and approaching it from that point of view is that compassion goes a long way, especially for people who are dealing with addiction issues.
get curious.
Yeah, definitely get curious. But yeah, thank you very much, Eric, for coming on the podcast today. You've provided some really valuable insights. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Your Head in Mind podcast. I hope today's conversation with Eric Fischer shed some light on the complexities of addiction, its connection to mental health, and the hope that therapies like ART and EMDR bring to recovery. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction or mental health challenges, remember that support is available and taking the first step towards recovery is always possible. Compassion and connection are key, and emerging treatments offer new paths to healing. So if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might find benefit from these insights. You can also follow us on social media or visit our website to join in the conversation on our forum and stay updated on upcoming episodes as we continue to dive into mental health from every angle. For more information on Eric's work and the resources mentioned today, check out the episode description. I'm Kyle, and until next time, take care and keep your head in mind.